Hello again, and welcome to episode 3 of the Crash MotoGP podcast. Now, a quick caveat for this episode and a quick apology if the tech breaks on us ever so slightly. Pete, as ever, is stuck in Thailand at the moment. Keith, somewhere in the UK, and this week I was actually in France. Sadly, not at Le Mans, but at Paul Ricard, having to deal with, well, circuit Wi-Fi. But don't let that deter you from a brilliant show we have coming up for you, as MotoGP once again puts on an excellent show in France this week for the Grand Prix in Le Mans. In the build-up to the weekend, I don't think I've seen as many crashes across the categories in any racing series, but despite the challenges that the weather brought to the circuit, we got underway with conditions still changing for the Sunday race, and seeing off the rest of the field was the Ducati of Jack Miller, ahead of Johann Zarco and Fabio Quartararo, recovering from his arm pump surgery in third. Well, here to discuss it with me, as always, is, of course, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider, British champion and commentator Keith Huewan. Gents, let's get stuck in straight away, shall we? And start with our race winner, Jack Miller, who makes it back-to-back wins, but it wasn't an easy ride for him, was it, Keith?
No, you're right, Harry. What surprised me, first of all, is that you haven't seen that many crashes. Well, you've not been to Le Mans at a motorbike meeting, have you? Le Mans is always the one with the most amount of crashes during the course of the year. And it was a Frenchman last year, I think it was. I think this is on Crash as well, Pete. It's obviously one of your editorials that Zarco holds the record for the most amount of crashes last year. And I think the year before as well, I think I'm right in saying. So there's a man that was looking forward to one perhaps this weekend. But Jack Miller... Who predicted him last week on Crash? I can't remember now. But anyway, he looked great through the week. You've got to remember he has good background at Le Mans as well from the Moto3 days. He was very good on a Moto3 bike round there. Spectacular into record him on the last turns 13 and 14, the last two on the track. It's a track that works for him. It's a track that works for Ducati, particularly in the wet. And despite all the shouting and screaming that we were all doing during the course of the day, it looked like we were going to get a dry MotoGP race. And we end up with the first flag-to-flag in 4 years. And really, it kind of played into the hands of Ducati a bit because we knew they would be good in the wet, and they looked good in the wet. The big surprise for me was how the man with probably the least amount of wet experience on a MotoGP bike, Fabio Quartararo, managed it so well, because I think he wasn't looking forward to those iffy sort of transitional conditions, the ones where when you're chasing a track, whether it's you're chasing it from wet to dry or dry to wet, really, really difficult, particularly on a track like Le Mans, in that, you know, you make the mistake of pushing it a fraction too hard when the track is drying out and you fall down, or if it's raining, then it's the other way around. It's very, very difficult. Such a fine line. I reckon Quartararo really, despite the fact Jack won it, was probably the man of the race.
Well, I predicted Quartararo, but sadly it didn't quite come off on this occasion. But actually on that, and talking Quartararo and Miller, both obviously on the podiums, and Pete, but both of them had long lap penalties. So what does that mean? How can they possibly take a penalty, especially Miller with 2, and then come back and win it? That doesn't add up in my book. Something's not right there.
That's right. They got penalties. Miller and his teammate Bagnaia got the penalties for speeding in pit lane. And Quartararo was for a rather amusing pit stop mistake where he pulled into teammate Maverick Vinales' area, basically, and then had to run over to his, jump on his bike and sort of escape. The long lap penalties, they've sort of been brought in because people don't like post-race penalties. You know, they want to see the result on the track. They do vary, obviously, from track to track, depending on where they put the long lap, exactly how much time you do lose. I guess the argument might be that, you know, Miller from the replays, he looked like he was going about 10, 15 kilometers an hour too quick for pit lane. So, you know, what's the size of the time that he might have gained there? And then you lose a couple of seconds per long lap. But as you say, it made absolutely no difference in the end. He was already in the lead effectively, having served those penalties. So, yeah, it didn't affect the result, either for Quartararo with his single lap penalty as well.
But Keith, surely that means the penalty's not really working.
Well, the problem is that the long lap was brought in basically because if you were given a ride through, it's too long, particularly at somewhere like, you know, all the pit lanes are so variable in their lengths and the like. You can even have different speed limits. There aren't, I don't think, in MotoGP, but they're all around 60 Ks. But the fact is that Le Mans particularly, it's a tricky pit lane to get into. It's really, really tight when you're coming off what is the old 24-hour course and the like. You can bumping across things and the like. It's very, very tricky to get into pit lane. And then it's a massively long pit lane all the way out to effectively turn 3 at the top up by the Dunlop Bridge. So the penalty would be huge and it would wreck a race. What we had in this situation was Jack Miller was chasing Fabio Quartararo, did a long lap, dropped back a little bit from Fabio, almost caught him, did a long lap, back in the race. It didn't kill the race. And I think MotoGP are very mindful of not completely destroying a race through penalties. He paid his penalty. I don't know what the problem would have been, Pete, whether both Ducatis for some reason or another didn't flick their, I mean, it might just be coincidence because I haven't heard anything from the paddock at all, but it's amazing that both the two factory Ducatis didn't flick the switch to be on the limiter in pit lane. I find that quite Bagnaia and Miller. I don't know why that would have been.
Yeah, it does seem to be with Miller. It was definitely on the way into pit lane. So as you say, it does seem like he just maybe, with everything going on, didn't flick the button on in time. And as he joked afterwards, he is used to getting speeding tickets in France, but usually that's on 4 wheels.
Aren't we all?
Yes. So he wasn't. He didn't actually know why he had the penalties. That was until after the race. He just saw that he had to do them, did them, but didn't really know why.
Did he look like he cared?
Well, on the subject of pit stops though as well, and Keith, you brought this up earlier. It's been the first time in a long time we've had this sort of changing conditions in about 4 years as well, and that really sort of meant the pit lane was all in kind of chaos, really. And then you compare it to other things like F1, for example, where their pit stops are slick, precise, under 2 seconds long. And then the minute these MotoGP bikes have to come in, change tires, change bikes, it looks like, I feel like organised chaos is almost a polite way of putting it.
First thing you've got to be concerned about with a pit lane of motorcyclists is most of them are crook already. Most of them are already injured in some way, shape or form. So to start with, hobbling is like a sort of a course for motorcycle racers. So, you got Morbidelli, who'd already got a knee injury. I mean, when he was doing his practice for pit lane for the flag to flag, everyone was doing practices yesterday. It's like this, pardon the pun, it's like a knee-jerk reaction. But for him, it really was a knee-jerk because he fell off one bike and fell into the other one. And again, today, he's hurt himself again today. That knee is obviously giving him some stick. But there, as you know, being a bit of a car man, Harry, it's critical. Yeah, when you're fighting for thousandths of a second on the track in a MotoGP, and it is thousands now. I've been a campaigner for 4 decimal places for some time because we're getting times that are equal to 3 decimal places quite often now in MotoGP and the other classes. When you've got thousands of a second you're dealing with, you would think that they would just be a little bit sharper on how they can gain a tenth or two in pit lane because it is a bit of a mess. Now, granted what I just said, Le Mans is tight coming in, but once you're on pit lane, it's not a bad place. It's not too narrow down pit lane. It's not like Phillip Island, for instance, where it is carnage. You've got that horrible tight left-hander at Phillip Island coming onto the pit lane, and then you've got tiny, tiny areas to get yourself sorted out. So, but you would think that they would practice it more. I mean, let's talk about Red Bull Racing, for instance. I mean, how often do the Milton Keynes guys, they're pushing the car in with all their guys and changing all the wheels, and they practice that and practice that and practice that. And I often wonder why, MotoGP don't. I mean, you see, they give it a bit of a nod on a Saturday or a Friday if they think the weather's going to turn over the weekend. They might all have a bit of a go at it. But the variation in how it's done, even from an organisational point of view, it's been changed over the years. I mean, they've tried different angles of where the bikes are. You can't just park your bike out the front of the garage. There is a specific way, specific angle that these things are lined up in pit lane as per the rules. And now you've got to touch the ground between them. There were times like, the ant that he is, Marc Marquez used to leap off of one bike onto the other. And there was a time when the mechanic would be holding the clutch in with it already in gear. All that's been wiped out now. It's much more strict as far as what you can do. Of course, this supposes somewhat that you actually pull into the right garage, as in the case of Quartararo, of course, pulling into Vinales' garage and then getting a long lap penalty for running around his bike, like you've already said. But the worst thing for that was all the mechanics, they're waiting there with his bike. Then some of them have got to run round and collect his bike that's now blocking up Vinales' garage. So it wasn't just the rider that had to do the little dance around everything. It was also the mechanic, so I felt a bit sorry for those guys as well. But back to it without all the waffle. It's a bit of a mess still in MotoGP pit stops. I mean, flag to flags are not something that it seems that everybody is quite as au fait with as perhaps they ought to be.
And so something like this, I suppose, Pete, is going to make them think twice going forward in actually putting in that practice and putting in the hours to cover off stuff like this. Because, this kind of race and results can make or break championships come the end of the year.
That's right, Harry, yes. And I mean, the other thing is, as you said, it's been so long that for a lot of riders, this was their first flag-to-flag race. I guess it's a bit like a penalty shootout in football. You can practice it, but when you're there in the stadium in the World Cup final, it's a different thing. And certainly I think a lot of the riders that hadn't done a flag-to-flag race before will learn from what we saw today. And I'm sure that they will have a lot of the questions that we're talking about here. They will be speaking with their teams and going, hang on a minute, we lost a lot of time there, or we could have done that better. What were the out laps like, the in laps? Where did we lose time? Because as Keith's saying, this is all easy seconds that you're giving away.
Yeah, and look who took advantage of it brilliantly. Again, Honda, since their Phillip Island debacle a few years ago, where they didn't bring up, Marquez in on time, so he actually got a massive penalty for that. But they've really got it worked out. And Marc Marquez, even with that shoulder, he was in and out. He gained a place straight away. He gained position in pit lane. Now, you shouldn't be able to do that. If everyone's on their game, you shouldn't be able to gain places. And he did. He went out, led the race, and all of a sudden we thought, Marquez, he's back with a 25-pointer here, because I thought he was going to clear off in the distance at that point. Which kind of brings us to the subject. I'll ask the question, Harry, if you like.
No, please do. You're leading us straight there.
Well, have we got the real Marc Marquez back? Or, Pete, I'm going to ask you this because you're slightly longer in the tooth, I think, than Harry. I hope I haven't insulted you. But the point being is that have we got a Freddie Spencer syndrome here? An absolute alien until he hurt himself and never really looked like the same guy again. Marc Marquez didn't look like the Marquez that we all know and love. He just doesn't look like he's able to save what he could save every session almost in the past. It's something, either mechanically things aren't quite the same for him, he's not got the feel he had, or mentally is a problem for him, and he's not quite across everything that's happening at the moment. And the look on his face, have you ever seen him sit back on his pit box with his head in his hands? I don't think I can remember. Marquez, the mark of Marc Marquez, he would never show you weakness. He would never show you that he's in pain. He would never show you anxiety. Absolutely. You've seen him where he's almost got his legs stuck up his backside, and he would even hobble in a more dignified manner than anybody else, just to show everybody that he was not going to be this is what you were dealing with. You were dealing with Marquez the Great, the tough. But to see emotion from him in that pit box, that's a couple of times this year we've seen that. And I have to say it's a dynamic I've never seen from him before. And it's sad to see for me. I mean, you feel for him. You feel for the kid.
Yeah, I think he exactly as you're saying, Keith, when he was talking just about an hour ago, he knew he blew a big chance today. He had as you say, the shoulder is obviously playing up a lot. He's not able to ride as he wants. The bike isn't as he wants either. But there he was leading the race. He managed to get himself there. He had the chance. Then he made the mistake. Although, as he said, the first crash didn't actually disappoint him too much. It was a weird off throttle, off the brakes, rear tire thing. He said what really disappointed him was the second one, because he said he didn't realize he was the fastest guy on the track. And, he still had time to make up positions then. The race wasn't over, and he was planning to come in and change to slicks. He said he'd indicated to the team he was going to go for that, and who knows what might have happened. But yeah, that's what he told us, at least, was that his biggest disappointment was the second crash. But absolutely, today was a big missed opportunity.
That strikes me as anxiety. He's just had a little bit of anxiety there, that he just wanted to go a little bit too fast too soon, whereas he would have managed. These kind of conditions would be made for the likes of Marc Marquez normally. He'd ride that 6-inch drying line that no one else could get near and make everybody look silly. The only guy that ever gets near to that is really Jack Miller, of all people. He'll stick a slick in when it's still damp or whatever it might be. But Marquez has been magnificent in that area for so long. We've kind of taken it as standard. And all of a sudden, everyone's beginning to doubt slightly. And I wonder how much he is.
Cool.
Yeah, it's so much a mind game, isn't it? As you say, Keith, when you maybe, especially with MotoGP as close as we always say it is, when you just have that little bit of doubt in your mind that that's not what you need, is it? You need to believe that you've got everything ready, everything that you need to perform. And I think it did, it did knock him quite a lot. I think he saw that, as you say, these are his conditions. There he was back at the front, first time since Valencia 2019, leading a race, and then suddenly it all got pulled away from him twice, and you could see it wasn't what he expected. And I think that, it's certainly been a lot more complicated, this comeback, than we thought. We thought it would be get the physical strength back, but we're seeing the bike is still not working as he wants. He's having to change his riding in the corners. I mean, when are we going to see the Marc Marquez that we know come back? What's it going to take?
I think we'll see him, but I don't know when it will be. And I don't know whether it will be as consistently brilliant as perhaps he has been in the past when it comes to being able to save the kind of things he's been able to save. Where is he now? 64 points behind, 17th place in the championship. Someone like Marquez can make that up. As it is at the moment, everybody's stealing points off of everyone else. So, Marquez, if he was his usual brilliant self, he could end up winning the world title still this year. Having said that, Harry, you'll get a word in a minute. Is the championship might be shorter than we actually think it will be, because this COVID business is ramping up again around the world. Thailand has got a major problem. Pete and I both know Thailand very well. We have friends there, we have family there, and at the end of the day, that might not be on the cards. Australia, I'm sure they're going to keep their borders shut. We've just lost Finland, not because of COVID particularly, as far as I'm aware, but anyway, Finland's gone, so we've got 2 Austrian rounds now. That, again, the Styrian Grand Prix is, it's a shame that one of the most funded and able tracks on the calendar is not one of the most attractive from a riding motorcycle point of view. The old Ostrike ring would have been. Sorry.
Well, that is a very good point, and I wanted to chime in on this as well, because call me naive, but yes, it was obviously a bad result for Marquez this weekend, and you could see that mentally it really affected him with that. It's a great picture as well of his head in his hands, or with helmet in his hands right at the end. But surely the fact that he had that huge accident, had to take so much time out of racing and come back mentally and physically, we're still pretty early on in this season. So to be riding right up there and showing a steady pace of improvement from the very first round, it's not like he's going downhill. He is improving with every single race incrementally. Surely that's actually a good sign. And yes, this is quite a tough race to swallow for him, but it was tricky conditions either way. And surely you could say that actually this is a good thing for him, because it will make him learn properly, and then he could come back fighting. Because we are seeing now Marquez, he is up there challenging for podiums and wins.
If you'd seen anybody else, if it had been any other name on it, Harry, then you're absolutely spot on. Anybody else that was riding as good as he is even now, then you would say, oh, look at this kid. But it's Marc Marquez. Expectation is massively high, both in his head and in ours, and everybody watching, and all the riders watching, and all the teams watching. Marc Marquez is a phenomenon. He is the phenomenon of that paddock. And for him to be showing a little chink in his armour at the moment, we'll see where it all heads from here. I'm not writing him off, I have to say that straight away.
Well, talking of expectation, let's look a little further down. And we talked about him a lot last week. Valentino Rossi, 11th out of 16 finishes. It was not the improvement that I think everybody was holding their fingers crossed for. Everyone was saying don't worry, Le Mans is when he's going to be coming back on it. But Keith, it just hasn't worked out for him, has he? And something's still not right, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon.
No, I mean, again, another great motorcycle racer. He is the GOAT, the greatest of all time up to now. There are a lot of people that perhaps write him off a little bit too soon, but it does look like 2021 is going to be the year that may well be his last year. The performance in difficult conditions. I mean, these motorbikes, they're perhaps easier to ride now. there's a distinct difference between riding a motorcycle and racing a motorcycle. I mean, these bikes are much easier to ride now than ever. You will have heard it before about the 2-strokes and no electronics, all the rest of it. These bikes, anybody can get on them and ride them, but to race them, to get them close to the edge, you've got to be a bit special. Valentino Rossi is still very, very special, but that degree, that 1 degree, that 0.0 or 0.1 degree perhaps, that he's off the pace, and it is costing him. I genuinely thought he would be somewhere thereabouts this weekend, and with the iffy conditions and all the experience he has, I genuinely thought he would be. I thought he'd be top 6 for certain. We don't know the reasons yet. I've not seen the press. I didn't do the briefing afterwards, the debrief afterwards, to see what reasoning was behind it. But the whole Petronas team had an absolutely crap weekend. It's got to be their worst weekend in ages. Morbidelli as well as Valentino. I mean, by their heady standards from when they first came in, this is one of the worst weekends they've had. And it's very sad to watch at the moment. You've got the biggest man in the sport, bar none. Doesn't matter about even, people might think Marquez is the biggest, but he isn't. It's Valentino Rossi globally. It's, I won't say it's sad to see, because it happens. We get to this point with all sportsmen. Doesn't matter what sport it is. We get to this point at some stage. Could he have guessed it? Could he have headed it off? Maybe next year when he comes back with whatever team he's deciding on running and whatever motorbikes that is going to be in, and Valentino Rossi will take on a new stage. Certainly, it is what it is. I just want to, be grateful for what we've seen from Valentino Rossi, and hope, fingers crossed, that he manages to pull something out of the bag before he decides to call it a day. That's where I am with it. I feel sad. I feel slightly emotional saying stuff like that. I mean, I always hate journalists that pick on riders, particularly. I mean, it doesn't matter whatever standard you're at, whatever you are. Every rider out on the racetrack, whether it be British Superbike, World Superbike, Grand Prix, of course. It's the pinnacle. Grand Prix, MotoGP is the pinnacle for me. Every one of those riders is putting everything they have in their heart, soul, and physique into what they're doing. It means everything. There isn't a degree. It's not, well, we can go down the pub tonight and enjoy it, or whatever it is. Everything goes into it. I remember what it was like for me, even at my level, to where, and it won't be any different for Valentino. He will be sitting there at the moment and he'll be feeling terrible, because it means so much to everyone out there. So I get slightly annoyed when cheap shots are being fired at any rider. Tito Rabat. Tito Rabat. Did you get a point, actually? Let me have a look, see if Tito got a... Yeah, he got the last point. Tito Rabat can ride a bloody motorbike. There's no doubt about that. But he gets stick all the time. But he's actually probably more important from that. Let me have a quick squint on here. Where did Tito Rabat? He was a minute. After 27 laps, he was a minute away from the bloke who won the race. Yeah, some of you internet trolls ought to give that a go sometime. See if you can get within a minute of the Grand Prix race winner.
Well, just on Valentino, Pete, we're not quite sure if there's any explanation. That have you managed to hear anything post race from them or the team? Any indication?
He said that he felt confident if it was fully wet. He had quite a good warm up. The warm up was soaking wet, and I think he was 7th fastest. And so he felt like they'd made some steps there, and he could at least be in the fight. But then they had that nightmare first lap. Keith was talking about the Petronas team, where Morbidelli and Pole sort of had a bit of a tangle, and then Morbidelli speared off the track, and Rossi got sort of bumped wide, and I think he dropped about 4 or 5 positions in that moment there. It's almost like he just can't get a break at the moment. He was somewhere near top 10, something to build on in mixed conditions, and then already he's back in 13th, and etc. So, and it seemed like in the mixed conditions and in the dry, he just didn't have the pace to sort of challenge beyond that. So I mean, he felt like he made progress at the Jerez test, but with the mixed conditions this weekend, didn't really get a chance to see it. Whether Mugello will be a completely stable weekend for the weather, so that he can work on the bike and see, is that a direction to go in or not? Who knows? But it'll be a huge weekend for him. Obviously, his home round. There'll be a lot of questions about his own future, a lot of questions about the future of his team. Will they go with, it seems like 50-50 Yamaha or Ducati next year? And that also has implications for the team he's in now, of course. If they take the Yamahas, what will Petronas use? So yeah, it's going to be a big few weekends for Rossi in many areas, not just his own career, but also his team as well.
I think that underlines the Yamaha situation at Le Mans. I think that underlines is why I said right at the beginning of this conversation that Quartararo pretty much was my man for, gets the man of the match, really, because none of the Yamahas had really worked out that transition from wet to dry, dry to wet. Iffy conditions were where the Yamaha was really having difficulty in hooking up. I think getting that drive out of the corners was an issue for all of the Yamaha men, and Quartararo kind of overcame it in the race. They weren't expecting any of the Yamahas. They needed it to be dry. The Yamahas, I think you were right, Harry, in what you said last week that Quartararo could have dominated had it been dry. But when the conditions are half wet and cold, then that throws a real spanner in the works for all of the Yamaha. So I think Quartararo overcoming it as well as he did in this race was quite brilliant.
I think he ticked two boxes in this race. Exactly what you say, Keith. I think that first of all, the arm pump didn't come back, so that must be a big relief to him. First race since that operation, so big relief. That seems to have worked. And secondly, as you say, Keith, he had a really bad race at Le Mans last year in the wet. He was struggling this weekend in kind of the wet mixed conditions. If you want to be a world champion, you're going to have to, perform under those conditions. And you could see the delight after the race. It was like he'd won it, wasn't it? And I think that's maybe why. Maybe it was more important in terms of the championship, a second place in those sort of crazy, iffy conditions, than another runaway win in the dry. He now knows he can be a contender, whatever the conditions now.
Well, while we're on the subject of teams, I want to quickly sort of sidestep to Aprilia as well. And Keith, you were saying before we came on air, interesting to see both riders packing up, and it's unusual for Aprilia because they've been relatively consistent and on the pace so far this year. And we're not quite sure the reasons to why both bikes packed up.
Well, it was double disappointment, wasn't it? Because Savadori, all the detractors and all the people throwing mud at him because Bradley Smith obviously lost the ride and Savadori came in. And a few people scratched their head and wondered why Savadori would be the guy that comes in alongside Aleix Espargaro. He proved that he can ride a motorbike this weekend. He came through from qualifying he went from Q1 into Q2. Looked pretty good, particularly in difficult conditions. Again, I think the Ducati does perform quite well at Le Mans in the wet conditions or the wetter conditions. And he was first out with a smoky motorbike. So I don't quite know why by that I mean it looked like it had thrown its lunch up. So I don't quite know what happened with that. And then we had, Aleix Espargaro, who continues the misery of Aleix. He's going to be like Victor Meldrew soon, isn't he? He's always got quite a miserable face on at the moment. He doesn't seem to be very happy about quite a lot of things. So it'll be interesting to see. And the brother Pole, of course, he's been kicking off about the Honda development areas as well. I should think they must be a right pair of brothers to go and sit and have a cup of tea with. Not.
Pete, anything to pick up there from trackside? Did Aprilia come out and say anything afterwards, or are they leaving us in the dark?
No, they left us in the dark. Aleix would just say it was a technical problem. He said they know what it is, but that's where it's staying. He said he did say that he'd had an engine problem earlier in the weekend as well. We do know that they're the only team that are allowed to develop their engine during the season. So whether they were trying something new this weekend, who knows? And that brought issues somewhere. We don't know. But of course, Aleix has got issues of his own in that he's going to be going for arm pump surgery on Monday morning. He said although he didn't have any problems in this race, he did have them in Jerez like Quartararo. And so now he's going to, he's not convinced that he actually needs the operation because the race was okay today. But he said, he's got to remove the doubt because if he goes to Mugello, Aprilia's home race, and he's on for a good result, and then he has arm pump, he's going to feel terrible. So he said, surgery is not something you take lightly, but he feels he's got no choice. So I think it's 8 a.m. Monday morning. He's having surgery.
He just wants a matching scar like all the other heroes. You can't make light of it, I suppose. Really, it's funny how I was listening to some of the guys today that were coming across some of the broadcasts that kind of like it's. Somebody said it's not invasive surgery. I thought, hang on a second, There's a dirty great knife and a dirty great slit up the inside of your arm, and they slice the sheath that holds the muscle. Wow, that's not invasive. I don't know what their interpretation of invasive is. But you're right about Quartararo. It was good to see him so happy about the fact that, I mean, the relief was in his face, really, wasn't it? As he came through on the slowing down lap into Parc Ferme. I mean, Jack Miller goes from arm surgery to winning Jerez. And everybody says, watch out when Jack Miller comes to Le Mans after that win. I think Cal Crutchlow had said as well, somewhere I read somewhere that Cal had said, you watch him now, he's going to really go for it when he gets here. And sure enough, Cal knows his onions, doesn't he?
Well,
I think it's really his wife. His wife tells him everything, and then he thinks he knows everything, but it's Lucy who tells him, really.
Well, I want to come back in towards the end and finish off with a bit of talk on Quartararo, but I just want to take a quick sidestep to Moto2 and Moto3, if I may be so bold. And if we kickstart with Moto2, Ralph Fernandez on top, Remy Gardner and Marco Bezzecchi third. But for the Brits, Jake Dixon, Sam Lowe's not a particular weekend they'll be wanting to remember anytime soon.
You're so polite, Harry.
I've got to be. That's my role.
It's bloody diabolical.
Tear it down.
Terrible. I mean, Sam's having moments at the moment where he kind of crosses over from the old Sam, rushing at it like a bull at a gate, full of bravado and brilliance, but puts himself in a position that trips him up. That was the old Sam, to the one that absolutely dominates the track, looks a class above everyone else. And he can't kind of leave that old Sam behind and finds himself in that situation. And if you want to add Moto3 into that, I mean, brilliant from John McPhee. I mean, I think there are a lot of people around the world that were beginning to sort of, well, I'll say getting fed up with hearing the same stuff from John. He's clearly a great rider. He seems to, through qualifying, put himself in a position where he's got too many people around him after the start and gets tripped up occasionally. 2 times this year, it's not been his fault, or has it really? Because he's in amongst people he shouldn't be in amongst at the start. I know Moto3, you can rescue it from there, perhaps, but sometimes it's all very well being able to come from the back to win a race, but you've got to go through a lot of people desperate to beat you on the way there. And if you get tripped up on the way, but to see that 4th place, should have been 3rd. He had one little bobble where he ran it a little bit wide and he lost 0.8 of a second on that lap. And if he hadn't had that one slip up, I think McPhee would have been on the podium and we'd have all been screaming. So welcome back, John McPhee. The real John McPhee has just stood up again. And hopefully that will continue and he'll go and win some races this year because he's well capable of it. It just doesn't seem to happen for John. I can't put my finger on it, Pete. I really can't. I mean, from a rider point of view, he kind of, when he's riding the motorbike and he's racing it on a Sunday, he's doing everything right. But I don't think you can excuse poor qualifying because that puts you in an area you really don't want to be in, which is amongst a bunch of axe murderers all trying to get under you and over you all in one go. And if you get tripped up or knocked off by somebody else, if you hadn't put yourself in that position in the first place, then maybe it just might not have happened. Easy to say, of course. I mean, like massively easy to say. And I'm not being disrespectful at all. But it's so good to see McPhee back on that quality form that we know he is capable of. Now all he needs to do is nail it together for the rest of the year, because otherwise we're going to start worrying about where he goes next. And that is a distinct worry at the moment with the amount of talent that's coming through underneath him, I suppose.
Exactly, Keith. I think for several years, John has been looking to go up to Moto2, hasn't he? And it hasn't quite happened. So, but to make that move, as you say, it's so competitive. You need to show that you are a regular race winner in Moto3. And
well, it was a tricky one, wasn't it, last year, because he got blocked off by his compatriot. I mean, it was Jake Dixon who's basically blocked the Moto2 ride at Petronas that John had got allocated to him effectively. But then they couldn't really let Jake go because suddenly Jake was showing great form. That wrist injury he carried through the winter, though, seems to be probably more serious for him than we'd all considered, and maybe even he had, because his form this year has not been quite where we were expecting Jake. He hasn't made the step that we perhaps thought he'd make. And to finish where he finished, he'll be bloody beside himself. When you consider that last year, he all but won the race. He was the moral winner last year. although he did end up on his ear at the end of it all, which was a great shame.
Well, a slight surprise, perhaps, that Acosta wasn't on the top step of the podium this weekend, but still a pretty impressive weekend nonetheless. He did cross the checkered flag in 8th after a bit of an off, only lost about 10 seconds, chucked him back down to 21st, then able to pick his way, crucially, back through the field, cross the line in 8th and extends his championship lead.
Do you see the way he falls off? He falls off like Marc Marquez used to. It's a crash that doesn't seem to happen for about half an hour, and then it does. As Marquez probably would have saved it, but Acosta's only 16. He hasn't quite worn himself into that saving it mode yet. But the front was under, and he was on the floor, and he was sliding along behind the bike. And I thought, any minute now, it's going to go burp, and he's going to be back up on it. I couldn't believe it. And I want to be Aki Ayo at the moment, the team owner stroke manager. He's just had a 1-2 in Moto2, and he's got a rookie leading the Moto2 championship in Raul Fernandez. He's got a rookie leading the Moto3 championship in Pedro. It's funny, we talked a little bit about Acosta before, but I did a bit more because I'm not at trackside anymore. I did a bit more digging for him. He doesn't come from money. He didn't do the CEV championship. He did the rookies. He's come the hard way, Pedro Acosta. He's actually looking like the real deal. And he's a kind of, he's a very serious kid. There's no doubt about it. You wouldn't think he was 16 when you hear him speak, that's for sure. But he's come the hard way. He's going really, really well. And he's increased his lead in the championship this weekend, even though he's had what would normally take you out of the race completely. He's looking a bit like Marc Marquez, a young Marc Marquez.
Yeah, but without all of the, I remember Mark when he was in the 125s, it was just all action, wasn't it? It was, you couldn't take the camera off him because wherever he was on the grid, there'd be, bumping into people bumping into him, falling off, getting on, recovering. Whereas Acosta, he fell off, and the easy thing for a rookie to do, wouldn't it, would just be to sort of panic and try and make up all of the time he'd lost in one lap and fall off again. But he didn't. He kept calm, worked his way through despite those conditions. And, as you say, extended his lead. So under the circumstances, it was another test that he passed, if you like, of dealing with a different kind of pressure and still coming out, with a bigger advantage than he went into the race with.
That's the way to have a bad weekend, isn't it?
It was certainly another very impressive drive from the youngster. Let's flip back to MotoGP as we sort of round things off. And I think we are really in for a tight battle in the championship if it all carries on like this, because Miller is now just 16 points off of Quartararo, and Quartararo, crucially, although he didn't quite get the win, very nearly could have done, as I would have predicted. But we spoke at it briefly as well. A great comeback for him in confidence after that arm pump surgery to go forward from here.
3 Ducatis snapping at his heels when we go to Mugello. This is a bit of an interesting one, isn't it? Sadly, Mugello is going to be a sterile environment for the first time in my life. I've never known it in the way it's going to be, because if you've never done Mugello on a MotoGP weekend, Harry, I mean, there's a few of these tracks we're going to drag you around at when we get out of there. When we get out of this virtual stuff, we're going to get you on the piss.
Please, I'm dying for
Mugello. Mugello would be a good one because you wouldn't sleep for days. I took two of my daughters to Mugello a couple of years ago, and I think they and their mum think that I don't actually do any work, because most of us are off on a bit of a jolly, aren't we, really? We're off to go motorbike racing and have a great time and get slaughtered every single night. And, of course, you arrive at the track in the afternoon on a Thursday, stepping off your plane in your hire car and all the rest of it, and then you're at the hotel at 7:30, and then it all starts Friday morning. And this applies to racers as well, and it might be a bit of insight for some of the guys that perhaps haven't been around racetracks or been around racers at all. You start at maybe 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. By the time you get out, first you've slept in a bed that you don't know. There's always been someone banging against the walls or knocking them, making a row in the hotel or outside the hotel. So you never get any bloody sleep anyway. So you have to be used to not getting any sleep. Get up in the morning really early, drive to the track, do all your bits and pieces. Sort of 5:30, 6:30 that evening, you've had your day. You go back to the hotel, grab something to eat, go and do your prep. Then the next day, qualifying day, which is the longest day for everybody. It's a long day, qualifying day. Bearing in mind that we're talking about Mugello here, that's got a goat track to get in it and out of it. So it always means that it takes you hours to get in and hours to get out, particularly on race day, obviously. So then you come to race day. Now, if you don't leave the hotel at sort of, 5 o'clock, 5:30, you ain't getting in time to actually be doing your job. So you've got to leave early. So you arrive there. So my girls, by this time, they're hanging. Thank God. They are my best advert when I got home. My wife actually believes me now when I say we do work. And it's the same for the rider. I'm not trying to give myself sympathy because I'm not, because I enjoy every minute of it. And I can only fall off a chair rather than fall off a 225 mile an hour motorbike nowadays. But the fact of the matter is that come Sunday, racers are in the same situation as us. We are worn out. When they need to be at their very best on the Sunday, that's when they're now tuckered out. They've come to it's the third, fourth day that they've been doing stuff. They've been doing PR. They've been doing all the stuff that goes on around it. It's a really hard job, not to mention the physicality of it for a racer. You know, I saw someone, a Twitter troll, that was having a go. I think he was having a go at Aleix at some stage because he was late for a press thing. No, it was a journalist. That was it. That's what really got me wound up. A journo was having a go about Aleix having a massage. Do these people have any clue what a rider's body goes through racing a MotoGP bike? Clearly not. Otherwise, this established journalist that's been at the trackside for I don't know how long wouldn't have dared to go there. And Aleix had the temerity to be late because he was having a massage. What do you think? He ended up with a happy ending or something? Does he think he's in the wrong country? I mean, we're talking about a sports massage where Aleix Espargaro was trying to get rid of the massive aches and pains that you have. And of course, all that compounds by the time you get to a Sunday. I don't know why I went on about that, but I'm just saying, again, on a pathetic point of view, that Sundays are tough. And sometimes you're not in the condition you want to be in when you get to a race day.
It will certainly be very strange to see Mugello without any fans, as you're saying, Keith. I mean, usually if you want to fly out the night of the race, you almost have to leave. You see people leave before the flag drops, because if you wait for the end of the race, there's a traffic jam and you're not going to get back to the airport, wherever probably Milan or somewhere like that, Bologna if you're lucky. So, to see it in 2 weeks' time on TV without any fans.
Noise.
Yeah, no fans, no flares, it's going to be very strange. It'll be like, I don't know, you wonder how, I mean, you've obviously been there a lot longer than me, Keith, but you almost wonder, it's such a beautiful sort of place where it's in. You wonder, how did they ever get permission to build a racetrack here?
It's Italian.
Thank goodness they did, yes, because it's, it's unbelievably, scenic place to be.
And thank heaven for Ferrari. If Ferrari hadn't spent the money on it, it would be a dump, because it is in a place that's not used that often. So the fact that Ferrari use it as a test track, and it's a motorbike track as well. I mean, actually Formula One found it, didn't they? In their troubles in the pandemic, suddenly they found Portimao and Mugello. Now they all want to go back there every bloody time because they've got a couple of decent tracks on the calendar rather than some Tilke built thing that's got a load of hairpins in it. Like where we're going in, like COTA, for instance, Circuit of the Americas. I mean, 5 hairpins, 5 bottom gear corners in one circuit. Hang on. Anyway, we can go on another story there, Harry.
I think we can. Well, I think, though, we will have to put a pin in it just for the moment. But never fear, because we do this every week. So that we always get to chat about something at least once a week. But we will leave it there for today's show. Keith, Pete, a pleasure as ever. Make sure, though, you let us know your thoughts, if you have any, on the race. And any questions you have as well. I'm more than happy to put them to the guys. So leave them in the comments below or drop us a message on the Crash MotoGP socials. MotoGP is back in action in a couple of weeks' time in Italy, as we've been saying, sadly with no fans, but the sooner I think we can get fans in the stands, the better for everybody. We will be back same time next week. So in the meantime, make sure you like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review and stay up to date with all the very latest MotoGP news on crash.net.